My hydrangeas don't bloom. Why? Well, it's one of the most frequently asked questions about hydrangeas. And there are a couple reasons why they may not bloom for you. Many of us are familiar with the pink or blue giant heads of hydrangea flowers in the spring, and many of these types don't bloom for you. And part of the reason is it depends on where you live. I'm Mark Viette, and I live here in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. We have what we call sort of a mountain climate. There's two mountain ridges on either side of the valley, and the weather can really change. You can get really cold nights, cold days, and then really warm days. We're not surrounded by a lake or an ocean. And this is called the big leaf hydrangea. Reason it's called the big leaf hydrangea, it has big leaves. And this hydrangea produces either the pink or blue blooms that you'll many times see around people's houses. Well, our climate does affect the big leaf hydrangea. And either the buds that can bloom freeze in the fall, probably November, December, or during the winter. And the buds are produced at the tips of these stems. So if I were to cut a stem, right at the tip of this stem, sometime in late summer, early fall, the buds for next year are produced. So if during the winter we get really hard temperatures, or very cold and very warm, that bud freezes. This is last year's stem, and right at the tip, the bud froze. It's brittle and it froze. In fact, part of the stem froze. Now they've come up with new varieties on these types of hydrangeas that are supposed to bloom better for us. Now in our garden here, where we're zone, maybe 6A, I've not seen a lot of success yet with these. Some of these have buds that are produced lower on the stem, and some have buds that are produced at the tip and they produce a new stem. But for us, they don't bloom as well as they're supposed to. Now, a couple things about this plant. The best way to prune this plant is to thin it out. And thinning out means you take out 2 out of every 10 stems completely. If you were to give this plant a haircut in the winter, or trim them back like that, you will cut off every bud that's going to bloom for you next spring. So you do not take a shears on the spring blooming hydrangea and shear it back. You definitely won't get any blooms on that. I do want to make a comment. I sometimes get a question about leaf spot. It is, or these are subject to a leaf spot, and throughout the season it gets worse and worse, and you'll have to spray a fungicide, probably on the new growth in the spring, and just follow the label direction for a fungicide that will control the leaf spot on hydrangea. I'm going to show you some foolproof, probably one of my top 5 favorite hydrangeas that is fantastic. Another easy to grow hydrangea that will bloom for you is known as the tree hydrangea. Hydrangea tardiva is known as the tree hydrangea. If you look, it's going to get anywhere from 12, maybe 15 feet tall. It's similar in retrospect to the Annabelle Hydrangea in that it blooms on new wood and it blooms in the summer. So you're going to prune this during the winter or spring, early spring that is, and that'll determine how big it gets. But I really like it because it has beautiful white flowers has some height in the garden. It grows about the same size as the Limelight Hydrangea, which is another summer blooming hydrangea. And this hydrangea does sort of change color to maybe a pink, light pink or olive color. So it has fall interest at the same time that it has summer interest with its beautiful white flowers. In fact, the flowers are white like this is my cat, follows me all around the garden, and this here is Whitey, and she follows me everywhere in the garden that I go. In fact, she'll follow me for hundreds of feet, and she'll follow me into the fields. So she's like a little dog. But again, the tree hydrangea, easy to grow. Prune it early. It blooms on new wood. So when you're done pruning, it will flower probably about four months after you prune it in early spring. And again, you can cut it hard, or you can just let it grow more in the tree. Again, that's a tree hydrangea, Hydrangea tardiva, one of those easy to grow plants that you can have in your own garden. Another new series of hydrangeas that are what I call foolproof blooming. I mean, they're guaranteed to bloom in my garden here. And as I said, we can have cold winters. Limelight gets much bigger this. So imagine this getting up to 12 or 15 feet. But this is one I really like for the gardens, especially if you don't want a big garden or you don't have a big garden, you have a small garden space. It's called Little Limelight. It doesn't get any taller than me. So, 4 feet is normal for this. Maybe 5 feet, if it really likes its area. But it blooms in the summer, and it blooms on new wood. So when you prune it during the winter or early spring, it produces new growth, and then it produces flowers. And we have pruned this probably as short as 2 feet, 2.5 feet. We don't prune it every year. Maybe we prune it every 2 years, but it stays nice like this. In addition to that, after the pure white flowers, they sort of turn a pinkish tone. So you have beautiful fall color with the flowers. Again, Little Limelight, you're probably going to plant them, I'm going to say 4 feet apart. And this is just one plant, but imagine this whole corner of the garden filled with color like this. My favorite hydrangea, well, within the top 3 or 5 hydrangeas you can grow in your garden, is this variety that you see around me here. It is super hardy. It always blooms every year for me, and it's probably one of the best foolproof blooming hydrangeas that you could have in the garden. It's known as the Annabelle Hydrangea. It's Hydrangea arborescens Annabelle. And probably about 35 years ago, we planted 5 or 6 plants. It has slowly spread. It's not invasive, but it has slowly spread over the years in this area that you see. So it's really done very well. Below the dogwood, the crepe myrtle, the mugo pine, and in addition to that, I have dug plants out of here in the early spring for people's gardens. One of the reasons it is so foolproof is that it blooms on new wood. So anytime during the winter or spring, you can cut it back, and I'll show you how to do that. You can cut it back at different heights. Just imagine, because it's finished blooming, a much better white than you see here on these large heads. But there is something else you can do with this hydrangea. You can dry it. So when they first start blooming, they pure white, then they sort of turn almost an olive green, And then after that, they turn into an olive green color that you see here. A perfect time to harvest and dry this. My dad has arrangements in his house that have been there, well, now I call them dust collectors. They've been there for 5 years. You dry this, you can put these beautiful dried heads on a stem in a vase and just leave it year round. So what you do to dry them is first you cut the stem, and then you just pull off some of the leaves, just like this. And you go to a garden shed or an attic, and you stretch a string or a wire, could be 10 feet long, and we'll do a little make-believe. Here is the string, and you're going to hang each stem on a make-believe string. You'll have a real one in your building, and you dry them. Now is a perfect time to dry them. Some of these in the sun, we had a lot of rain, they're sort of, declining, but in the shade, the heads look just like this. Really easy to dry. I found I left 2 leaves here. I'm going to pull them off. And in about 6 to 8 weeks, they're perfect to use again. Now, I mentioned this is a summer blooming hydrangea. They bloom on new wood. So that means you can prune them early spring or midwinter, whatever you'd like to do. And it's not hard to do. I usually like to use the hand shears, but you can use the head shears at the same time. So we're going to make a little make-believe here. Imagine all the heads are going to be brown, and all the leaves are going to be off of these. So you're just going to see these stems or sticks sticking up in midwinter or early spring. So when you look at this, plant, I'm going to bend these back so you can see these. This is what you're going to see in the winter. So you're just going to come down and you're going to kneel. I find it works better to kneel. And you're just going to kneel in your garden. Take your trimmers or shears, and 2 ways they're cut. Some people, my dad likes to cut them at 8 inches. So he'll come in and he'll cut all the stems down to 8 inches. I prefer to do something a little different. I like my hydrangea Annabelle to be a little shorter. So I'm going to cut mine to 2 inches or 1 bud. Now, my dad's that he had cut at 8 inches to 10 inches, they're going to get about this tall. But the ones that I cut to 2 inches or 1 bud, they're going to be about 1/3 shorter. And when I'm saying 1 bud, if you look very close at the hydrangea, there's a bud here, bud here, bud here, bud here, and I'm going to cut this to only, imagine my hand is the soil, I'm going to cut it to 1 bud, and each of these buds are going to grow and produce stems. In the back, we were not able to cut any of the hydrangeas in the background here. So you can see they're almost 5 feet tall. So if you don't cut them, you're going to have more stems and they're going to get taller. If you do cut them, you're going to have less stems and they're going to be shorter. Again, the Annabelle Hydrangea is one of the best hydrangeas for your garden. It'll grow in sun and bright shade.